Have you ever wondered why you can drive a car for 10 miles on a familiar highway and suddenly realize you don't remember a single second of the trip? Or why you'll spend 20 minutes agonizing over which toothpaste to buy, but then make a massive life-altering investment based on a gut feeling that turns out to be disastrous? We like to believe we are the captains of our souls, rational beings making logical choices. But the truth is much stranger. We are all being piloted by two very different, often clashing internal systems. One that is lightning fast and emotional, and another that is incredibly lazy and slow. Welcome to the masterpiece of the Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman, Thinking, Fast and Slow. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are tackling a book that isn't just a bestseller. It is arguably the most influential book on human behavior of the last 50 years. If you've ever felt like your brain was sabotaging you, or if you've ever wondered why smart people make incredibly stupid mistakes, this episode is for you. By the end of our journey through Kahneman's work, you're going to have a user manual for your own mind. We'll learn how to spot the mental traps that advertisers and politicians set for us, and more importantly, how to stop falling into the traps we set for ourselves. We're going to break down the two systems, explore why our gut is often a liar, and discover why we are actually predictably irrational. So, let's meet the stars of the show. Kahneman introduces us to two characters living inside your head. He calls them System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the fast part of the title. It's the hero of your everyday life. It operates automatically, quickly, with little or no effort and no sense of voluntary control. Think about when someone shows you a photo of an angry person. You don't choose to see them as angry, you just know they are. You can complete the phrase "bread and" almost instantly. You can drive a car on an empty road or detect a note of hostility in a spouse's voice. This is System 1. It's your intuition, your instinct, and it's always on. It's like the autopilot of a jet. Then there's System 2. This is the slow part. This is what we think of as our conscious self, the part that deals with logic, math, and complex decisions. If I ask you what 17 times 24 is, System 1 will tell you it's a multiplication problem, but it won't give you the answer. You have to wake up System 2. Your heart rate will actually speed up, your pupils will dilate, and you'll have to focus intensely to work through the calculation. System 2 is the pilot of the jet, but here's the catch. System 2 is incredibly lazy. It hates spending energy. It would much rather let System 1 handle things because System 1 is cheap and easy. The drama of our lives comes from the interaction between these two. Most of the time, the handoff is seamless. System 1 handles the routine, and System 2 steps in when things get weird or difficult. But problems arise because System 1 has no off switch. It cannot help but make snap judgments, and it is prone to systemic errors called biases. Think about this. A bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Your System 1 immediately screams 10 cents. It's such an intuitive, easy answer. But if you pause for just a second and wake up System 2, you'll realize that if the ball is 10 cents and the bat is $1 more, meaning $1.10, then the total would be $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. Even students at Harvard and Princeton get this wrong because System 1 is so confident and System 2 is so tired. Now, before we dive into how these systems affect your money and your happiness, let's pause for a moment. If you're enjoying this breakdown of the human psyche, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. It's the best way to help us keep bringing these deep dives to your ears. And hey, it's a great way to give your System 2 a little workout. Let's get back to the laziness of System 2. Kahneman calls it the law of least effort. If there are several ways of achieving the same goal, people will eventually gravitate to the least demanding course of action. In the economy of action, effort is a cost. This is why cognitive ease is so dangerous. When things feel familiar, when they are printed in a clear font, or when a statement is repeated often enough,
Our System 1 feels safe. We stop checking for errors. This is the foundation of the illusion of truth. If you tell a lie often enough, people don't just hear it, they start to feel it's true because it becomes easy for their brain to process. This brings us to one of the most famous concepts in the book, YCATI. It stands for What You See is All There Is. System 1 is a storyteller. It takes the few pieces of information it has and builds a complete, coherent narrative. It doesn't care about the information it doesn't have. It's why we make snap judgments about people's character based on a single outfit, or why we think a company is a great investment just because we like their latest commercial. System 1 jumps to conclusions to save energy, and System 2 is usually too lazy to double-check the work. In our next segment, we're going to look at the anchoring effect, the reason why you spend more than you should at sales, and the availability heuristic, which explains why we are terrified of things that almost never happen, like shark attacks, while ignoring things that actually kill us, like heart disease. We'll also see how these systems affect the way we remember our lives, and why our remembering self is often a total stranger to our experienced self.
Now that we understand the two characters living in our heads, the impulsive System 1 and the lazy System 2, it's time to look at the tricks they play on us. Daniel Kahneman calls these heuristics. A heuristic is really just a fancy word for a mental shortcut. Usually, these shortcuts are helpful. If you're being chased by a bear, you don't want System 2 to sit down and calculate the bear's velocity versus your lung capacity. You just run. But in the modern world, these shortcuts often lead us straight into a wall. Let's talk about anchoring. This is one of the most reliable and most devious tricks in psychology. Anchoring happens when people consider a particular value for an unknown quantity before estimating that quantity. What happens is that the estimate stays close to the number that people considered, hence the word anchor. Kahneman and his partner Amos Tversky ran a famous experiment where they rigged a wheel of fortune marked from 0 to 100, but they secretly programmed it to stop only at 10 or 65. They would spin the wheel in front of a group of people and then ask them two questions. First, is the percentage of African nations in the UN higher or lower than the number on the wheel? And second, what is your best estimate of the percentage of African nations in the UN? The Wheel of Fortune has absolutely nothing to do with African politics. Everyone in the room knew it was random, and yet the people who saw 10 on the wheel guessed, on average, 25%. The people who saw 65 guessed 45%. That's a massive difference based on a completely irrelevant number. You see anchoring every single day. When a real estate agent shows you an overpriced house first, they are anchoring your expectations. When you see a sign in a supermarket that says limit 12 per customer, you end up buying more than if the sign wasn't there at all. The number 12 becomes the anchor, and your brain starts negotiating with it. We think we are being rational, but we are just drifting around an anchor someone else dropped in our ocean. Then we have the availability heuristic. This is the tendency to judge the frequency or importance of an event by how easily examples come to mind. Think about this. Are you more afraid of dying in a plane crash or a car accident? Statistically, cars are infinitely more dangerous, but when a plane goes down, it's on every news channel for a week. The images are vivid, terrifying, and easily accessible to System 1. Because you can see a plane crash in your mind more easily than a mundane car wreck, your brain tells you it's a bigger threat. This creates what Kahneman calls an availability cascade. A minor event gets media coverage, which leads to public panic, which leads to more media coverage, and eventually the government passes laws to solve a problem that barely exists while ignoring massive problems that are just too boring to make the news. Our emotions are driven by stories, not by statistics. System 1 loves a good drama. It hates a spreadsheet. And this leads us to framing. How you present information is often more important than the information itself. Imagine you are sick and you need a dangerous surgery. Dr. A tells you the 1-month survival rate is 90%. Dr. B tells you there is a 10% mortality rate in the first month. The statistics are identical, but experiments show that people are much more likely to choose the surgery when it's framed as survival rather than mortality. Our System 1 is loss-averse. It reacts emotionally to the word death or loss, even when the logical outcome is the same. Marketers know this. It's why you see 90% fat-free on a yogurt container instead of 10% fat. It's the same yogurt, but one feels like a health choice and the other feels like a guilty pleasure. But why is System 2 so bad at catching these mistakes? Well, as we mentioned, System 2 is lazy, but it's also a yes man. It often spends its time justifying the crazy things System 1 believes. This is called confirmation bias. We don't look for the truth, we look for evidence that what we already believe is true. If you believe a certain political leader is a genius, your System 1 will highlight every success, and your System 2 will find a clever excuse for every failure. Before we move on to the law of small numbers and how we totally misunderstand how luck works, I want to invite you to take a second. Look at your own life this past week. Where did you get anchored? Was it a sale price at a store? Was it a first impression of a new colleague? Awareness is the first step, but as Kahneman warns, even when we know about these biases, we still fall for them. It's how we're wired. If you're finding this useful, please share this episode with someone who's about to make a big decision, maybe a house purchase or a career move. It might just save them from their own System 1. Let's talk about the law of small numbers. Humans have a natural talent for seeing patterns where none exist. We hate the idea that the world is random. If a basketball player makes 3 shots in a row, we say he has hot hands. But if you run the data, there is no such thing as a hot hand. It's just a statistical fluctuation. We generalize from small samples. We meet 2 people from a certain city who are rude, and we decide that everyone in that city is rude. System 1 is a machine for jumping to conclusions, and it is particularly bad at understanding that small samples can produce very weird results just by pure chance. We crave stories of cause and effect. We want to believe that the best CEO made the company successful because of his vision, when in reality, he might have just been in the right place at the right time. We underestimate the role of luck in everything. In the next part, we're going to look at overconfidence, why experts are often less accurate than a coin flip, and prospect theory, the groundbreaking discovery that won Kahneman the Nobel Prize. It's the secret to why we hate losing $100 more than we love winning $100, and that one simple fact shapes the entire global economy.
We've seen how our brains take shortcuts, but now we have to face a harder truth. We are incredibly overconfident in those shortcuts. Kahneman introduces a concept that is both humbling and a little bit frightening. He calls it the illusion of understanding. We believe we understand the past, which gives us the false sense that we can predict the future. Think about the 2008 financial crisis, or any major historical pivot. After it happens, we tell a story that makes it seem inevitable. We say, the signs were all there. This is hindsight bias. Once an event has happened, we literally lose the ability to remember what it felt like not to know it was coming. This bias makes us cruel to decision makers. We blame leaders for a bad decision that turned out poorly, even if the decision was perfectly logical at the time with the information they had. Conversely, we praise lucky leaders as if they were geniuses. Kahneman spent years studying experts, stock pickers, political pundits, even military officers. He found a shocking trend. People who spend their lives studying a subject are often no better at predicting the future than a dart-throwing chimp. But because they are experts, they are more confident and therefore more dangerous. They fall victim to the planning fallacy. Have you ever started a home renovation or a work project that was supposed to take 2 weeks and $500, but ended up taking 6 months and $5,000? That's your System 1 painting a best-case scenario, and your System 2 being too lazy to look at the average statistics of how long those projects actually take. Now, let's get into the heart of Kahneman's Nobel Prize-winning work, prospect theory. For decades, economists believed in utility theory, the idea that people are rational and make decisions based on the final value of their wealth. Kahneman proved they were wrong. He showed that we don't care about the final number as much as we care about the change from where we are right now. And here is the golden rule of human psychology.
Losses loom larger than gains. Imagine I offer you a coin flip. If it's tails, you lose $100. If it's heads, you win $150. Would you take the bet? Most people won't. Even though the expected value is clearly in your favor, the pain of losing $100 is twice as powerful as the joy of winning $150. To get most people to take that bet, the potential win usually has to be at least $200. This is loss aversion. This explains why people hold on to failing stocks for too long, hoping to break even so they don't have to realize a loss. It's why we stay in bad relationships or bad jobs. The endowment effect makes us overvalue what we already have just because we own it. Losing it feels like a physical threat. But there's a weird twist. While we are risk-averse when it comes to gains, we become risk-seeking when all our options are bad. If you are guaranteed to lose $900, or you can take a 90% chance of losing $1,000 and a 10% chance of losing nothing, most people will gamble. We will take huge, irrational risks just to avoid the pain of a certain loss. This is how gamblers go broke and how companies go bankrupt. They double down on a losing hand because they can't face the reality of the loss. Before we move into the final part of our journey, where we talk about the two selves and the secret to happiness, let's take a quick break. If you've ever felt that sting of losing $20 being worse than the joy of finding $20, you've experienced prospect theory firsthand. If you're finding these insights valuable, please take a moment to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us grow, and more importantly, it helps your fellow humans understand the glitches in their own biological software. So, how do we fight this overconfidence? Kahneman suggests a pre-mortem. When you're about to make a big decision, gather your team and say, imagine we are 1 year in the future. We implemented this plan and it was a total disaster. Now everyone take 5 minutes and write down the story of why it failed. This forces System 2 to wake up and look for the flaws that System 1 is trying to ignore because it's too busy being optimistic. In our final section, we are going to look at the end-peak rule. It turns out your brain doesn't remember your life the way a video camera does. It remembers it more like a movie editor who only keeps the most intense parts and the final scene. This explains why a perfectly good vacation can be ruined by one bad flight home, and why we often make choices that don't actually make us happy in the long run. We'll wrap everything up with a checklist you can start using to think slow when it matters most.
We've spent a lot of time talking about how we think and how we choose, but we haven't talked about how we feel. In the final part of his book, Kahneman introduces a distinction that is genuinely mind-blowing. He says we have two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is the one living in the moment. It's the one feeling the sun on your skin or the frustration of being stuck in traffic. But the remembering self is the one that keeps the records. It's the storyteller. And here's the kicker. The remembering self is the one that makes all our future decisions. Kahneman found that our memory doesn't work like a tape recorder. It follows something called the peak-end rule. When we look back on an experience, our brain ignores the total duration. Instead, it averages two things: the most intense moment of the experience, the peak, and how it ended. In a famous and somewhat controversial study, Kahneman looked at patients undergoing painful medical procedures. Patient A had a short procedure that was very painful. Patient B had a much longer procedure, but at the end, the intensity was lowered slightly before it finished. Logically, patient B suffered more total pain because the procedure lasted longer. But when they were asked later, patient B remembered it as less painful. Why? Because the end was better. This is why you can have an incredible 2-week vacation, but if you lose your passport on the very last day, your remembering self will say, "That was a terrible trip." It's also why we stay in relationships that aren't good for us. If the peaks were high enough, our remembering self forgives the long, low-level misery of the everyday. We are, in a sense, servants to our memories, not our actual experiences.
This brings us to the illusion of happiness. We often work hard to buy things or achieve goals that our remembering self wants, like a promotion or a luxury car, thinking they will make us happy. But our experiencing self might actually be happier just spending a quiet afternoon with a friend. We focus on life satisfaction, which is a story we tell ourselves, rather than happiness, which is how we feel while we live. So, after 500 pages of psychological evidence that we are biased, lazy, and confused, what is the takeaway? Are we just doomed to be irrational? Not exactly. While we can't fix System 1, it will always jump to conclusions and it will always fear losses. We can train our System 2 to recognize the signs that we are in a cognitive minefield. Here is your Thinking Fast and Slow checklist for 2026. First, slow down. If you are making a decision while you are tired, hungry, or in a rush, you are letting System 1 take the wheel. If the stakes are high, give your System 2 a night of sleep to catch up. Second, consider the outside view. Don't just ask, why do I think this will work? Ask, what usually happens to people in this situation? Statistics are more reliable than your gut feeling. Third, beware of the anchor. The first number you hear in a negotiation is a trap. Ignore it, throw it away, and start from zero. And finally, don't trust your memories blindly. Remember that your brain is an editor, not a historian. It will try to convince you that the ending is more important than the journey. Don't let a bad ending ruin a good story. Daniel Kahneman's work is a humble reminder that the most complex machine in the known universe, the human brain, did not come with an instruction manual. But by understanding the tension between our fast instincts and our slow logic, we can start to bridge that gap. We can learn to doubt our own certainty, and in that doubt, we find a little more wisdom. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. This has been a long journey, but if you've made it this far, your System 2 deserves a gold star. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with one person today. Maybe it's a friend who's a bit overconfident or a colleague who's struggling with a big choice. Until next time, pay attention to your thoughts, be kind to your lazy System 2, and remember, what you see is almost never all there is.